Well, I think one of the things that Living Legacies brings is a vast array of expertise in a different number of disciplines, and I think for a project like mine, which was interdisciplinary, which was drawn on sociology, which was drawn on history, which was drawn on geography, that really, I suppose, provided the expertise that was there and the fruitful conversations through project meetings, through the different events that were held in conjunction with the Living Legacies team. I think that really not only gave me confidence, but also the partners confidence in terms of what we were attempting to do with the project itself. Again, I think it was invaluable because it wasn't just the technical or the operational excellence that came with Living Legacies. Again, it was those networks. It was the expertise of people who have done these types of projects before. As a very early career academic coming into a project where there was a slightly different output, which was exhibition. I'm very confident in academic writing, for example, but that was a different type of output. So working with other members of staff of the Living Legacies team, for example, like Joanne Devlin-True and Elizabeth Crook, who had expertise in heritage studies, that really helped in the development of the outputs as well. So it was that kind of expertise, I think, but also the ongoing support and feeling that you were part of a team which was engaging with this particular subject area. I think that was crucial in terms of making you feel a little bit of part of something which is much wider, much more important than just one project. It was an ethos, I suppose, that was coming through in academic research. Well, I think that's the benefit for Living Legacies of working with community organisations. So I'm working with a community organisation who already have a very strong connection with the Racial Equality Unit, for example, in Stormont. So to take the project from an academic level and pull it through community back to policy is a kind of an original way of dealing with things. So that type of discussion can now begin, and our project can be disseminated to policymakers at Stormont through the community group that we're working with. So it's almost like a win-win situation for both academic research and community-based research. You have the academic rigour, but you also have the community contacts and networks, and I think that brings the potential for change in policy as we go forward.
The collaboration between Treasure House and Living Legacies has been fantastic. Treasure House is all about opening up the museum to people who wouldn't otherwise come to museums and who are maybe lonely or isolated. So this gives us the opportunity to offer something completely different, something that inspires, something that maybe makes people question their views. And also, because Living Legacies kind of fits really well with our remit, a lot of the people that would come to Treasure House would have a background with services, because Clan Mill used to own the Royal British Legion housing, and so we do find that there is a great interest in World War I amongst our participants. Also, they talk to their friends and their families, and it's a great conversation starter because they find out new and interesting and different things which they can then talk about. And one of the comments we had actually for Living Legacies was a gentleman who said that he'd actually had a conversation with his grandson, and he hadn't really spoken to his grandson very much because he said he didn't really have an awful lot to say, but because he'd seen the drama and it has sparked conversations, he was able to talk to his grandson about his own experiences and his war experiences and his family, and that was something that was very special indeed to him.
Living Legacies is a specifically engagement fund, and of course Living Legacies does do research, it does do impact, but it does it from a starting point of engagement which knowing that Living Legacies had that priority was exceptionally important for the project, because we definitely wanted to train up a large number of community researchers, Stacey first and the citizen researchers, and we wanted to give as many people as we could the opportunity to actually learn how to use archive collections, learn how to do oral histories, learn how to do other stuff around historical research. Living Legacies was not simply about, let's do an academic project, let's get that rolling, and then let's just get some kind of output from that which is good enough for the community. In some circumstances that works, but in too many circumstances that approach doesn't work. Living Legacies is very different, because Living Legacies says no, you can't just do a project and then create an output for the community. You need to actually bring the community into the project at every stage. So you need to make sure that there isn't a part of the project that's ring-fenced from them. And Living Legacies, from the outset, had the advice, the staff here in Belfast, the PI Keith, the co-owners, and it had the resources both for us to actually grab hold of more in documentary form, document form, and also resources of the community of people who actually could do that kind of work, where a community's engaged from start to finish rather than just at finish. This is something that's done better in Northern Ireland and better from QUB than it is in England. I think in at QUB and at Living Legacies, what they do differently is by having the community actually involved in the project from the get-go, involved in developing the idea, involved in actually producing the research, doing the actual research act itself, then making the outputs. Something much more complex can emerge, because if you imagine you're a member of the community and you just, it would be impossible to actually try and work out what a project was by just looking at what came out at the end. It would be too dense, it would be too complicated. But if as a member of the community you've been through every stage of that, seen it develop, seen the reasoning behind it, seen the entire picture, then that complex thing at the end is much more meaningful. And QUB seem to do that, appear to do that much better, much more consistently than do other universities I've worked at. So Living Legacies is very good at holding off and actually having very subtle forms of and very intelligent forms of support that aren't simply one size fits all. So, and that's the other reason why Living Legacies is a useful source of support for a researcher doing this kind of work, is because the support you get isn't off-the-shelf support. It's actually, you have a discussion about it, it's moulded to the shape of your project, and supports what you're doing as a researcher, rather than saying, well, actually, we have this procedure over here, and I'm afraid we need to pop it on your project like that. That doesn't happen. What happens is much more intelligent, much more bespoke, and that's a real quality of Living Legacies. Living Legacies produces a fair amount of exhibition content. One of the things I actually did develop through working with Living Legacies and engaging with the rest of the staff in the engagement centre, along with the rest of the PRs who, like me, had a project or worked on a project, was how to deal with, how to do, what you can reasonably put in and what can't go in an exhibition.
I think with the Living Legacies Engagement Centre, originally when the PI for the project, Professor David Harley from Exeter, we had some discussions around working with Living Legacies on the grounds of their remit tallying to the themes of photographs of landscape, of place, material, culture. So we felt that was quite a natural fit for the project, and also Living Legacies championing of other disciplines as a means of using the first centenary and exploring that through geography or whatever it may be. So that was something that particularly attracted us to this centre, and I suppose the notion of linking up with other academics and institutions from other parts of the UK as well. So I was always conscious of Keith's desire to have geographical links around the United Kingdom. So those were all reasons for wanting to participate within Living Legacies Unit. I think that the role and work of Living Legacies has always really championed connected communities aspects and also the mantra of co-production. I know that it is a philosophy that sometimes attracts a bit of scorn in some circles because of it being a sort of slightly nebulous concept, but I do think that when it is delivered successfully, that it can generate some really meaningful outcomes and outputs. So Living Legacies, I always thought, were particularly keen for that to happen and making sure that there was stages in place to help foster and generate working with communities and drawing on previous experience from the first round of projects that they had funded. So I think having that support really helped. I had also, I should mention, I had also done a previous co-production project with one of the other engagement centres, so I had a little bit of knowledge, I suppose, to draw upon that kind of practice based on working with volunteers from a local community organisation. So I think bringing all of that together meant that we were able to, I learned a little bit, I suppose, from the co-production philosophy in terms of how it works timing-wise and when things are needed to come together to generate outputs and working with volunteers and the requirements of that. So those I think helped deliver what was I certainly thought an original project.
The workshops really have been the huge kind of achievement of our collaboration really. It's working with Living Legacies has enabled us to bring in a much broader audience, I think, than we had before. It's helped us to access groups and projects that had already received funding from Heritage Lottery Fund and projects that Living Legacies were already working with, so that we were able to showcase those at the workshops and provide more examples for the different groups and individuals that attended. So that made a huge difference. The other big success was that this series of workshops was quite different. The first set of workshops we did focused much more on the CBA's regional groups and members from those. Whereas with these workshops we wanted to open up them to a much broader range of people. So we wanted not only to have existing groups, but we wanted people who were thinking about perhaps starting a project, but also we wanted to invite members of, invite heritage professionals along as well. And that was extremely successful, and as a result of that we've been able to collaborate with the Welsh Trusts and with the Defence Heritage Project in Northern Ireland as well, and that's enabled us to add quite a lot more sites to the recording app.
The support from Living Legacies has really been useful in terms of advertising the workshop. So we've, through their social media outreach and the websites, we've been able to effectively engage with a wider audience through social media by advertising collaboratively as well.
I would say for that, probably it's broadened the scope of the sites that we've looked at and engaged with workshop participants with as well. There's types of sites that we perhaps hadn't realised existed before. We were talking earlier about the tobacco factories in Northern Ireland that we didn't know about, and so through those workshops, through discussions with Helen Montgomery and members that attended the workshops, we found out about all sorts of things we didn't know about, and it's really broadened our scope, I would say. I think probably the range of things we were able to offer at the workshops increased because of our collaboration with Living Legacies. So we were able to give a much broader kind of range of skills development from Heather's participation in terms of being able to talk about how to develop projects, but also about being able to provide advice on fieldwork and that kind of side of things. Whereas we then went on to provide advice about using the recording app and recording and doing fieldwork in a slightly different way. So it gave people a much broader range of opportunity to develop their own projects. And the other crucial thing, I think, was that we had a representative from the Heritage Lottery Fund at all of the workshops, which was incredibly useful for the participants to be able to just go ask questions and find out what funding availabilities there were and how they could go go about applying, and I think that gave them a lot more confidence to think that they could actually go ahead and set up a project themselves. The other workshops that we've done in this series have all been outside, apart from the first one in Duxford, the rest have all been outside of England, and Living Legacies gave us the opportunity to do that, basically. It's something we really wanted to do, was to reach across the whole of the UK. And so this time we were able to do Belfast, Swansea and Stirling, so it made a big difference. I would say we were able to do would be to broaden people's horizons in terms of what First World War defence heritage is. I think people very much perceived it to be military sites. And we've shown them that it can be absolutely anything and anywhere, can have an association, whether it's because people use that building for a particular purpose, for anything from kind of holding a meeting or a demonstration to kind of being a recruitment centre. And it can be public, sort of open spaces as well. It's not just buildings. So I think, we've really kind of made the people that attended our workshops and that we've engaged with through the project have been able to look at their environment in a slightly different way and think about what the past history of buildings and spaces were.
And I think one of the things I've noticed is that there's great interest in the First World War defence heritage out there. The problem you find is that many of the individuals who are interested don't necessarily have the skills skill sets to effectively record sites in their local area. And the project has kind of highlighted that with even basic training, members of the public can get actively involved in recording their local defence heritage sites, but also more importantly make a vital contribution to the archaeological record as a result of the training we provide too.
One big legacy of it will be the archive that we're creating with the Archaeology Data Service. So all of the material that's been recorded will be added to the ADS, so it will be freely accessible to anybody. They'll be able to search a map of the UK, click on any sites and find out all the information that people have been inputting over the last 4 years. So that will be something that we hope people will use in future research, and we'll be able to contribute ongoing to our understanding of the First World War home front.
Initially it was going to be us photographing and using a basic scanner to scan things that people brought forward. That was the idea, but when Living Legacies got on board, the idea of a World War I Antiques Roadshow event kind of grew and got bigger and bigger, and I think HLF particularly liked this aspect of it, and so the funding application was successful. We got the £10,000 from World War I then and now I think it's called, and brought on a few volunteers. Our remit was to collect the data as set out by Richard Grayson's methodology, to run 5, I think, Antiques Roadshows across East Belfast, and to have what we were calling skills sharing workshops with community groups, sort of showing them how we had researched the bigger database and offering them the opportunity then to research smaller areas, a particular street or a particular area in East Belfast using the kind of academic methods. It was their ideas which allowed that particular event within our project to grow, and on paper I think that the HLF that looked very attractive compared to what it would have been had we tried to go our own way, which was literally just digital cameras and scanners and things like that. The ideas that were coming from Queen's, from Living Legacies, were very exciting. I think they allowed us to take part in events that we wouldn't necessarily have taken part in, and the one that sticks in my mind the most is it was a World War I Antiques Roadshow event in Central Library, actually, and Dr. Andrew Morrison was there, who was an MP, but he was if I remember rightly, he was the Prime Minister's, the Prime Minister had appointed him to oversee the decade of centenaries, I think, just in Northern Ireland. It might have been UK-wide, but I certainly had a remit in Northern Ireland. But he came and he was at that event and he heard firsthand what we were doing in East Belfast and other projects. But to my mind, Living Legacies had organised that event, so it allowed us
as a project to take part in events that we wouldn't necessarily have been able to, and in terms of the audience, it allowed us to speak to audiences that wouldn't necessarily have been there had Living Legacies not invited them, or had the name of Queen's University and that authenticity, you know, attracted people to it. So I think we definitely benefited from that. Everything that we expected and more. In fact, definitely more. We only ever expected their assistance for the Antiques Roadshow events. But when I think about it, it subsequently turned into support with our website, which we needed. It then allowed the project to go off into tangents, rightly or wrongly, if that took us away from our remit. It might have done, but it also opened new avenues for us in terms of the digital mapping and things like that. We were able to engage in things which just wouldn't have even been on my radar had it not been for Living Legacies. So, you know, I always kind of looked at my inbox for Elaine's emails coming through and wondering what sort of weird and wonderful ideas were coming through this month or whatever, and there was always something, whether it be walk-in tours, or can you come and speak to this group for us, or can you do this. So although we had only hoped for the support for the World War I Antiques Roadshows, I think there was so much more came from it, and vice versa too. Anytime that we asked for help, you know, Elaine was always there and responded very quickly, and I like to think that East Belfast did a lot to help Living Legacies as well.